The gods of Aurelia had never once been seen to bleed, and Hierophant Asamol had built her whole life on that single fact. She stood on the high gallery of the cathedral world, a planet the radiant choir had carved into one endless temple, and she watched the morning prayer rise from 9 billion throats. The sound did not travel as sound, it traveled as light. Across the great curved floor of the world, every face turned upward at the same instant, and every mind opened at the same instant. And into those open minds the gods poured their image, tall, burning, kind in the way a furnace is kind to the cold. The choir did not speak in words, they spoke in certainty. To look at them was to know, without doubt, that you were small and they were vast, and that this was right. Aesa had felt that certainty for 40 years. She had taught it to children. She had carried it into 11 conquered systems, and watched whole species kneel the moment the gods showed their faces in the sky. The choir had never needed fleets. They had needed only to be seen, because seeing was believing, and believing was obeying, and a mind that obeyed could not lift a single weapon against the ones it adored. This was the law of the galaxy, as Aesa understood it. The radiant choir were gods. Gods were not opposed, they were received. So when the watch priests brought her word of a ship, she almost did not listen. A ship was nothing. Ships came to Aurelia all the time, crawling in from the dark with their cargoes of tribute, and their crews already weeping with devotion before they reached orbit. The galaxy sent its ships to be blessed. A ship was a supplicant by definition. But the watch priest who knelt before her was shaking, and watch priests did not shake. They had been bred for stillness across 2,000 years. Their hearts beat slow, their hands did not move unless commanded, and this one, a young male named Toll, could not keep his fingers from trembling against the marble. "It will not pray," Toll said. Aesa frowned. "Then show it the gods." "We did, Hierophant. We opened the channel. We poured the morning image into its hull, the full glory, the same light that has bent every world. We held nothing back." He swallowed. It did not bend. It did not slow. It did not change its course by a single degree. The certainty in Aesa's chest did not waver. It could not. That was its nature. But somewhere beneath it, for the first time in 40 years, she felt a small cold thing stir, like a stone shifting at the bottom of a still pool. "Every mind bends," she said. "This is settled. This is the oldest law." "Hierophant," Toll said, and now he looked up at her, and his eyes were wet. "I do not think there are minds aboard that we can reach." She went to the gallery's edge herself. She did not trust the lesser instruments. She let the watch temple wrap its sight around her own perception, the way she had been trained, so that she saw the approaching ship, not as a dot on a screen, but as a presence in the great prayer of the world. It was small. That was the thing she would remember later, in the months when she had nothing left but remembering. It was so small. Set against the cathedral world, it was a splinter against a mountain. The choir's least cruiser was 4 times its length. The tribute barges that came to Aurelia dwarfed it. It had no banners. It carried no devotional sigils, no light offerings. None of the soft golden hull paint that conquered worlds adopted to show their love. It was the gray of old iron, left out in a hard rain. Its lines were blunt and ugly, and entirely without grace. A thing built by hands that had never once thought about being beautiful, only about being enough. Along its flank, in a plain hard script, someone had stenciled a name. The Watch Temple translated it into the only words Asa's people had for such a thing. The Warship, Last Verdict. She did not know that language. She did not know the small blue world it had come from. The radiant choir had not yet bothered to conquer that distant arm of the galaxy, the way a god does not bother to count the dust in a far corner of a hall. The creatures there were called human, and the choir's lowest scribes had filed them under a single word that meant, roughly, not yet relevant. Aesa watched the gray splinter come on. She reached out with all the practiced power of her office, and she touched its mind, expecting to find the soft, familiar give of a soul about to kneel. She found a wall. Not emptiness. Not the dead silence of a machine. A wall, deliberate and made, behind which something watched her back, calm and unimpressed and entirely awake. She had the sudden, vertiginous sense of having knocked on a door in the dark, expecting a servant, and having a hand close over her wrist from the other side. She pulled back so hard she stumbled, and Toll caught her, and across the whole cathedral world, for 1/4 of 1 second, the morning prayer stuttered. 9 billion voices missed a note. It had never happened before, not in 2,000 years. The gods felt it. High in their burning gallery, the radiant choir turned, all at once, toward the small gray ship that would not pray, and for the first time in the memory of any living thing, the gods of Aurelia were the ones who had been made to look. Asa straightened. Her training reasserted itself. The certainty closed back over the cold, stirring thing and buried it. "It is one ship," she said, and her voice was steady, and she believed it. "It is one small ship that does not yet understand where it has come. We will teach it, the way we have taught everything. We will show it the gods." She did not yet know that the humans had come precisely because they had already seen the gods on 11 dead worlds, and had decided that gods who ruled by being seen could also, with the right instrument, be made to be seen for what they were. The radiant choir did not debate. Gods do not hold councils, but there was a kind of agreement that moved through them, faster than speech, and the agreement was this: the small gray ship would be shown the full glory, and then it would kneel, or it would be unmade, and either way the lesson would be brief. Asisa was given the honor of carrying out the showing. It was the highest office of her order, and she had performed it 11 times on 11 worlds, and every single time the world had wept and opened and belonged to the gods before the light had finished. She believed in it the way she believed in her own hands. She descended to the great projection chancel at the heart of the cathedral world, where the entire power of the choir's perception could be focused and aimed like a lens. It was not a weapon, as the lesser species understood weapons. It fired no shell. It carried no heat. It reached into the mind of whatever it touched, and it placed there an image so total, so undeniable, so saturated with divine certainty, that the receiving mind simply rewrote itself around it. Soldiers laid down their arms, and believed they had always meant to. Captains turned their fleets aside, and believed it had been their own idea. Whole populations fell to their knees, and felt, in falling, the deepest joy of their lives. There was no defense against it, because the attack did not come from outside. It came from inside, wearing the face of the victim's own conviction. Aisa took her place. The choir of watch priests arranged themselves in the focusing rings. The cathedral world turned its single vast attention upon the warship Last Verdict, and Aisa lifted her hands, and the gods poured themselves through her into the human ship. She showed them everything. She showed them the radiant choir in their full burning glory, taller than worlds, kinder than mothers, more certain than gravity. She showed them 11 conquered systems living in bliss beneath the gods' light. She showed them the smallness of one gray ship against the immensity of the divine, and she pressed into the human minds the simple, undeniable, soul-deep knowledge that resistance was not merely doomed, but obscene, a thing no sane creature would attempt, like a candle declaring war on the sun. She held the showing for a full minute. It was the longest she had ever needed. Most worlds broke in seconds. Then she felt the wall again, and behind the wall, she felt something do a thing she had no word for. It filed the glory away. That was the closest her language could come. The human minds aboard the Last Verdict received everything she sent. They did not block it. They did not flinch from it. They looked at the towering, burning gods she had placed inside them, and they examined the image the way a careful artisan examines a forgery laid on a table, turning it over, noting the brushstrokes, comparing it against something they already held. And then they set it aside, intact, unbelieved, the way one sets aside a thing that is interesting but false. And underneath, where the certainty was supposed to take root, Asesa felt a single thought come back up the channel toward her. It was not loud. It was almost gentle. It was the most frightening thing she had ever experienced, because it was patient. "We have seen your gods," the thought said. "We came to see them. Now we would like you to see us." The chancel went cold. Ayasa staggered out of the focusing rings, and the watch priests caught her for the second time that day. Her nose was bleeding. That had never happened. The showing did not cost the giver anything. It was the receiver who paid. But something had pushed back along the channel, not to attack her, only to look, and the looking had been so vast and so calm that her body had treated it like a blow. Again, she said, because she did not know what else to say. We do it again. We open the whole world. We do not hold a single grain of glory back. They did it again. The cathedral world gathered its full strength, the strength that had bent 11 systems, and it threw the entire weight of the radiant choir's divinity at the gray splinter coming up out of the dark. The light of it lit the whole planet from within. 9 billion of the faithful felt the gods stir to their limit and fell silent in awe. And the warship Last Verdict came on, unbent, at exactly the speed it had been traveling, and crossed the orbit of Aurelia's outermost moon without so much as adjusting its heading. It was, Asa would say much later, the moment the law of the galaxy broke. Not when the ship fired, not when the gods fell. It was the moment one small gray thing took the full glory of the radiant choir directly into itself and was simply unmoved, the way a man is unmoved by a magician he has already watched practice the trick. The choir, at last, sent fleets. They had not done so in 2,000 years. The mechanisms of war on Aurelia were old and ceremonial, more pageant than weapon, but they were real, and they were enormous. 40,000 light-bound cruisers rose from the cradle rings of the cathedral world, each one larger than the human ship, each one crewed by devotees who had never once doubted, and who therefore could not imagine losing. They formed the halo, the ancient battle shape of the choir, a vast shining ring meant to surround the unbeliever and crush it not with fire, but with the sheer overwhelming presence of the divine, made physical. Aressa watched from the gallery. She told herself this was mercy. The ship had refused the soft path. Now it would learn on the hard one. 40,000 cruisers. One splinter. There was no arithmetic in the universe by which the splinter survived. The Last Verdict slowed. For the first time it changed. The Watch Temple reported it across the whole prayer of the world, and Asesa felt the change as a shift in the ship's posture, a settling, a thing she would later recognize as a soldier planting his feet. The gray hull opened, not in panic, in preparation. Long recessed lines along its flanks parted, and out of them rose the only honest things the humans had brought to Aurelia. Guns. Plain, blunt, ugly guns, built by hands that had never thought about beauty, only about being enough. The choir's cruisers closed the halo, 40,000 points of holy light tightening into a ring around the one gray dot. And the dot spoke. It did not speak with prayer. It did not speak with light. The Last Verdict's main batteries fired in a sequence so fast that Ayesa's perception registered it as a single sustained note, a hard flat tone with no music in it at all, the sound of a species that had decided a long time ago to be very, very good at exactly one terrible thing. The first volley took 1,100 cruisers, not damaged, gone. The Watch Temple tried to report their devotions, and found nothing to report. 1,100 shining presences simply absent from the prayer, 1,100 holes in the song where ships had been. Asesa's certainty cracked down its center. She had felt species die before. Conquest was not always gentle, but she had never felt the choir's own die, and she had never felt them die like this, in a single hard note, without time even to be afraid. The halo, which had surrounded 10,000 worlds in pageant, had never once been fired upon. It did not know how. The cruisers held their shining formation out of 2,000 years of habit, presenting themselves in a perfect ring, and the perfect ring was the easiest target a gunner had ever been handed. The Last Verdict turned slowly inside the halo, and fired again, and again, and again, that flat tone with no music in it, and each time it fired the prayer of the world lost another piece of itself. It was, Ayesa understood with a horror that was almost holy, not trying to break out of the ring. It did not need to break out. It had positioned itself in the exact center on purpose, where every cruiser in the halo lay before its guns in turn, and it was working through them with the unhurried patience of a man clearing a field of stones, because that was what the halo had become, the instant the humans refused to be afraid of it. Not a noose, a range. "Why do they not flee?" Toll whispered beside her. He was watching the cruisers hold their doomed shining ring. "Why do they not break the shape and scatter?" And Ayesa, who had spent 40 years teaching the faithful that the gods could not be opposed, heard the true and terrible answer rise in her own throat before she could stop it. "Because we never taught them what to do," she said, "when the thing in front of them is not afraid of God." The cruisers had been bred to overwhelm. They had been bred to surround, and to shine, and to be received. Not one of them had ever been taught to fight a thing that looked at their glory and filed it away and kept shooting. They held the halo because the halo had always worked. They held it as it died. 40,000 became 30. 30 became 20. The flat note went on. And the warship last verdict took, in all of this, not one wound. The choir's cruisers carried light weapons, perception lances, the same divine pressure that had bent worlds, and they aimed them all at the gray ship, and the gray ship received that pressure exactly the way it had received Asa's glory in the chancel. It filed it away. The humans aboard looked at the god's fury, recognized it as the same forgery they had already set aside, and felt nothing, and went on doing the one terrible thing they were so very good at. You cannot bend a mind that has decided what it believes. That was the lesson, though Asisa did not yet have the words. The whole power of the radiant choir had only ever been a key that fit one kind of lock, the soft lock of a mind not yet sure of itself. The humans had arrived with the lock already thrown. They had come, all this long way across the dark, having already decided exactly what they thought of gods who ruled by being seen. And so the key turned in nothing. When the halo was gone, when the last of the 40,000 had fallen out of the prayer, and the night around Aurelia was full of cooling debris that no longer prayed, the warship last verdict stopped firing. It did not pursue, it did not gloat. It hung in the silence it had made, a gray splinter, exactly as small as it had always been, and it turned its blunt, ugly face toward the cathedral world, and it waited. In the chancel, the watch priests were weeping. In the high gallery, the gods of Aurelia, the radiant choir who had never once been seen to bleed, were utterly silent. And Hierophant Asa Mole, who had touched the human mind twice now, and felt it look back at her both times, understood something that would take the rest of her life to finish understanding. The humans had not come to conquer Aurelia. Conquest was the choir's idea of victory, the planting of a flag, the bending of a knee. The humans had come for something stranger and far more dangerous. They had come to be seen. They had come all this way to stand in front of the gods of the galaxy and make those gods, and every watching world, look directly at one plain gray ship that took the full divine glory and was not moved. Because a god who can be ignored is not a god. And every world that had ever knelt to the radiant choir was, at this moment, feeling the prayer stutter and break, and beginning, in the dark of its own quiet mind, to wonder. The thought came up the channel one more time, gentle, patient, unhurried. "Now they have seen us," it said. "Now show them again, if you can." Atesa could not. The chancel had nothing left to give. The full glory of the gods had been poured out twice into the human ship, and had come back unbelieved, and a perception that has been refused cannot simply be poured a third time with more force. Force was never what it had been. It had been agreement, and the agreement was breaking across the whole galaxy as the news of a stuttering prayer spread from world to world at the speed of fear. She looked at the small gray ship hanging in the wreckage of the halo, and for the first time in 40 years, she let herself ask the question her whole faith had been built to prevent. What if they were never gods at all? What if they were only the loudest thing in a quiet room, and we the small creatures who never thought to cover our ears? The radiant choir, high in their burning gallery, felt her ask it, and they did the one thing gods must never be seen to do. They reached, all of them together, for the oldest and most secret instrument the cathedral world contained, the thing they had built in case the impossible ever came, the thing no faithful soul had ever been told existed. And in reaching for it, in admitting by the reach alone that they needed it, the gods of Aurelia confessed, in front of 9 billion watching minds, that they were afraid. The prayer did not stutter this time. The prayer stopped. Across the whole cathedral world, for the first time in 2,000 years, the faithful raised their faces to the burning gallery and saw not certainty, but fear, and the silence that fell was the loudest sound that planet had ever made. Isa stood in the middle of it, in the broken chancel, with the god's fear pressing on her from above, and the human ship's patience pressing on her from below. And she realized she was the only living priest of Aurelia who had touched the thing the gods were afraid of and lived. She was, she understood, about to become the most dangerous person on the cathedral world. Not because she had power, because she had doubt. And doubt was the one contaminant the gods had never built a defense against, the one weapon they had not imagined, because they had never imagined needing it. Below her, the warship Last Verdict waited, blunt and gray and unbeautiful, and entirely, impossibly, unafraid. There was a moment, in the middle of the halos dying, that Aissa would never speak of to the freed worlds, because they wanted a story of justice, and this was not that. It was something older and worse. A single cruiser, the Dawnward, broke formation. Its captain was a devotee named Sile, a woman who had served the gods for 60 years and had never once doubted. And when she saw 1,100 of her sisters vanish from the prayer in a single hard note, something in her that 2,000 years of certainty had buried, finally woke up and screamed. She did not flee. The faithful did not know how to flee. She did the only thing her shattered certainty could think of. She turned the Dawnward toward the warship Last Verdict and poured into it every weapon she had, the full perception lance of a holy cruiser, the divine pressure that had bent 100 worlds to their knees, aimed not at a kneeling population, but at one gray ship at point-blank range. Aissa felt it through the watch temple. She felt Sael's certainty break and reform into a single desperate prayer, the prayer of a creature who has just learned that her gods can lose and cannot bear to believe it, and so has decided to die proving them right. The Last Verdict received the perception lance the way it had received everything. It filed it away. Sael poured 60 years of unbroken faith into the human ship, at a range where a god's pressure should have flattened any mind in creation, and the humans looked at it, recognized it as the same forgery they had already set aside a dozen times that day, and felt nothing. Then they turned one gun, a single gun, toward the Dawnward, almost gently, the way a man turns to a child who has thrown a stone at him, and they fired once. Sael fell out of the prayer. Her ship fell out of the prayer. Aissa felt 60 years of certainty wink out in less than a second, and she understood, in that small, terrible moment, the deepest truth of the whole day. The gods' weapon was belief. It had always been belief, and the humans had brought a weapon that belief could not touch, because they were not asking the universe to confirm them. Sael had died demanding that her gods be real. The humans did not demand anything of the universe at all. They had simply decided and acted, and a decision needs no confirmation, and so there was nothing in the human mind for Sael's dying faith to grip. That was the engine of it, beneath all the fire, not bigger guns, a different relationship to certainty entirely. The choir's whole civilization was a machine for being sure. The human ship was a machine for being unsure, and acting anyway. And the second machine ate the first, because you cannot frighten a creature with the loss of a certainty it never wanted in the first place. The halo died around its center. The flat note went on, and Aissa, who had felt Sael die demanding that the lie be true, began for the first time to suspect that the lie had never been the gods at all. The lie had been certainty. The gods were only its largest and most beautiful symptom. 30,000 cruisers became 20. 20 became 10. The faithful held their shining ring out of 2,000 years of habit, and one by one they fell out of the prayer, and not one of them learned, in the falling, the thing the humans had crossed the galaxy to teach, because you cannot learn to doubt in the last second of a life spent being sure. They died certain. That was the cruelest part, and Aissa carried it the rest of her life. The gods' people died defending a lie they had never been allowed to question, and the question that might have saved them was the very thing the gods existed to prevent. She watched the last of the halo fall, and she did not feel triumph, and she did not feel grief, exactly. She felt the thing the humans must have felt on 11 dead worlds before they ever built the Last Verdict. She felt the cold, clear sorrow of looking at a great and terrible certainty and seeing, underneath it, only frightened people who had never been allowed to doubt. It was that sorrow, she would later understand, and not any weapon, that had built the human ship. They had not come to Aurelia in anger. They had come in something closer to grief. They had seen what certainty did to a galaxy, and they had built one honest gray thing that certainty could not touch, and they had crossed the entire dark to set it down in front of the loudest certainty in creation, and let it be seen. The halo was gone. The prayer of the world had 1,000 holes in it, and the warship last verdict turned its blunt gray face toward the cathedral world and waited, and Ayesa, standing in the high gallery among the silent gods, understood that the real battle had not even begun. The cruisers had been the easy part. The hard part was the lie itself, 2,000 years deep, and the humans had not yet touched it. They were waiting, she realized, for someone on Aurelia to open the door from the inside. They could break the mirror from without, but a lie broken from outside only teaches the broken to build a new one. A lie broken from within teaches them never to build again. The humans were patient. They had crossed the dark. They could wait a little longer for one frightened priest to decide what she believed. Atessa did not know yet that the priest was her. The secret instrument had a name that the gods had never spoken aloud, and when Asa finally heard it, she understood why. It was called the mirror. She learned of it the way a priest learns of forbidden things, in the panic of a crisis, when the rules that hide them break down. The radiant choir, in their fear, opened the deepest vaults of the cathedral world, and the watch priests were pulled from their stations and herded down into chambers none of them had known existed, and Aresa, because she had touched the human mind, was pulled down with them. Beneath the temple floor, beneath 9 billion praying souls, beneath 2,000 years of pageant, there was a machine. It was vast and old, and not beautiful at all, and that was Ayasa's first warning, because the gods made everything beautiful. The mirror was bare and functional, and built for one purpose, and the purpose, when the eldest of the watchkeepers explained it in a shaking voice, made Ayesa understand at last what the radiant choir truly were. The choir's glory had never been their own. That was the secret. 2,000 years ago there had been a species on Aurelia, a small, frightened, clever species, no more divine than any other, and they had built the mirror. The mirror could take the perception of a single mind and amplify it, multiply it, reflect it across a whole world and out into the dark, until one creature's image of itself became an unanswerable certainty in every mind that received it. The first Aurelians had built it to end a war among themselves. Then they had realized what else it could do. They had pointed it outward. They had used it to make the galaxy see them as gods. And then, over the centuries, they had begun to believe it themselves, because a lie reflected back at you 10 billion times stops feeling like a lie. The radiant choir who burned in the high gallery were the descendants of those clever, frightened builders, and they no longer remembered that they were anything else. They thought the glory was real. They had to. The mirror had told them so for 2,000 years. The human ship had broken the spell, not by being stronger than the mirror, but by being immune to it. The humans had looked at the reflected glory and seen the machinery behind it, and a reflection, once you see it, is only a reflection, has no power left at all. So the gods had come down to the mirror to do the one thing it had never been asked to do. They were going to turn it to its highest setting, far past anything used on a mere world, and they were going to aim the full reflected weight of 2,000 years of accumulated divinity at one small gray ship, and they were going to overwhelm the human mind, not with an image it could file away, but with a flood so total that the filing itself would drown. Apesa watched them prepare it, and she did the arithmetic of faith, and she found that she no longer believed it would work. She had touched the human mind, she had felt the wall, and behind the wall, the patience. The thing aboard the last verdict was not a mind that could be flooded, because it was not relying on certainty in the first place. The humans did not believe they would win the way the faithful believed in the gods. They simply intended to, which was a different thing entirely, a colder thing, a thing the mirror had no purchase on. You cannot reflect a lie at a creature who is not asking the universe to tell it what is true. The humans had brought their own answer. They did not need Aurelia's. She tried to say this. She was a hierophant. She had the right to speak. She stood in the cold chamber beneath the world, and she told the eldest watchkeeper that the mirror would not bend the human ship, that they had already poured the glory twice and it had come back unbelieved, that the thing they were afraid of was immune to the only weapon they had ever possessed. The watchkeeper looked at her with eyes full of 2,000 years of habit, and he said the thing that gods always say at the end. "You doubt," he said. Because the unbeliever has touched you. The doubt is the wound. We will heal it when the ship is unmade. And he turned away, and the great mirror began to wake, and Asia understood that she was not going to be allowed to be right. Before she made her choice, Asa went, alone, to the oldest part of the mirror, the part the watchkeepers had not thought to guard because no faithful soul had ever wanted to see it. It was a record, the clever frightened builders, 2,000 years ago, before they had begun to believe their own reflection, had left a record of what they did and why, the way honest people do before they tell a great lie, in case they ever needed to remember the truth. The choir had buried it. They had buried it deep, because the record was the one thing in the universe that could unmake them, more surely than any human gun. It said, in the plain words of frightened people, what the gods of Aurelia had always actually been. Aisa read it in the cold dark beneath the world, while the gods prepared the mirror above her, and it broke the last of her certainty, and it set her free. The builders had been losing a war, not against aliens, against each other. Aurelia 2,000 years ago had been 9 billion souls divided into 1,000 warring faiths, each certain it alone knew the truth, each willing to burn the others to prove it, and the burning had nearly ended the world. So a small group of builders, clever and frightened and tired of the fire, had made the mirror. They had meant it as peace. They had reasoned that if every mind on the world received the same image at the same instant, the same single overwhelming certainty, then the 1,000 warring faiths would collapse into one, and the burning would stop, and Aurelia would be saved. It had worked. That was the terrible part. The mirror had ended the wars. It had poured one certainty into 9 billion minds, and the 1,000 faiths had died, and the burning had stopped, and the world had been saved, and the builders had wept with relief, and called it a miracle, and then they had made the smallest and most human mistake in the history of any species. They had not turned the mirror off. How could they? The peace depended on it. Turn it off, and the 1,000 faiths might wake again, and the burning might return. So they left it running, 1 day longer, 1 year longer, 1 century longer, and the certainty it poured had to come from somewhere, and so a few of the builders had to stand in front of it and be the source, be the single image 9 billion minds received. They became the gods, not because they wanted to, because someone had to, and turning it off was unthinkable, and a lie that saves the world is the hardest lie there is to stop telling. The builders who stood in front of the mirror received their own amplified image 10 billion times a day, and slowly, over generations, they forgot they were builders at all. The mirror told them they were gods, and the mirror could not lie to the ones it reflected. And so they became gods, trapped inside the peace they had made, performing divinity every hour, because the alternative was the fire, until the original frightened clever people were 2,000 years dead, and only the gods remained, who did not remember ever having been afraid. Asesa read this in the cold dark, and she wept, because it was the saddest thing she had ever learned. The gods were not monsters. They were the descendants of frightened people who had told one merciful lie to save their world and been eaten by it. The mirror had not been built to conquer. It had been built to save, and the saving had become the conquering so slowly that no single generation had ever been able to point to the day it changed, because there was no such day. There was only the long, slow forgetting, certainty pouring into certainty, until a tool for ending a war became a war against the truth itself. That was the real horror of Aurelia, and Aisa understood at last why the humans had not come in anger. There was no one to be angry at. The villain was certainty itself, the human-shaped hunger to be sure, to not have to look, to be told what is true and never have to decide. The choir were not the disease, they were its most advanced symptom, and the humans, who had seen this same disease begin on 11 other worlds, had built one gray ship that was immune to it, and crossed the dark to set it down in front of the most developed case in the galaxy. Not to punish the gods, to show every watching world what certainty became if you fed it for 2,000 years. Asa closed the record. She understood now what she had to do, and why the humans had been waiting for someone inside to do it. The mirror could be broken from outside, but if the humans broke it, the freed worlds would simply find a new certainty to kneel to, a new image to receive, and within a few centuries, some clever frightened people somewhere would build another mirror to end another war, and the whole sad cycle would begin again. The only way to break it for good was for someone who had lived inside the lie to step out of it, of her own free will, in front of 9 billion watching minds, and show them that it could be done, that a mind could decide for itself and survive the deciding. The humans could not give that gift. No outsider could. A freedom handed to you by a stranger is just a new master. It had to come from within, from one of Aurelia's own, one frightened priest who had read the record and chosen the truth. She climbed up out of the dark. Above her, the gods were waking the mirror to its highest setting, ready to drown the human ship in 2,000 years of accumulated certainty. And Isisa, carrying the truth of the record in her newly decided mind, went to open the small, quiet channel that would let 9 billion souls see, for 1/4 of 1 second, exactly what their gods had always been. Frightened people who had told a lie to save the world and could not stop. Just like everyone, just like her, just, she suspected, like the humans too, somewhere far back in their own history, before they had learned the harder thing. So she made a choice. It was not a brave choice in the way the faithful understood bravery. It was the choice of a single mind that had finally, after 40 years, decided what it believed. And once a mind decides what it believes, the mirror has no power over it, and neither does any god. Asa knew the cathedral world better than anyone alive. She had walked its galleries for 40 years. She knew the channels through which the prayer flowed, the focusing rings, the deep conduits that carried perception from the chancel down into the mirror and back up into the burning gallery of the gods. She knew, because she had felt it twice, that the human ship could send a thought back up the channel that the gods had opened. She had felt their patience climb that channel into her own skull. And she knew that the gods, in their fear, had just opened the largest channel in the history of Aurelia. To aim the mirror at the last verdict, they had to connect the human ship to the full perception of the cathedral world. They had to build a road between the splinter and the throne. A road runs both ways. Agessa did not destroy anything. She did not have a weapon. She had only her office, her knowledge of the channels, and a single decision. While the watchkeepers focused the mirror outward at the gray ship, Asa went to the deep conduit she knew best, the one she had used 11 times to pour glory into 11 kneeling worlds, and she did the one thing a Hierophant of Aurelia was never supposed to do. She opened a channel of her own, small and quiet, between the human ship and the prayer of the world. Not from the gods to the humans, from the humans to the faithful, from the one mind that had seen the truth, to the 9 billion who had never been allowed to. Then she reached out across that little channel, to the wall and the patience behind it, and she did the thing her whole life had forbidden. She asked for help. She did not know if the humans would answer. She did not know if they could even understand her. She knew only that the gods were about to drown a ship that could not be drowned, and that when the mirror failed, as she now believed it must, the radiant choir would have nothing left, and a god with nothing left becomes very dangerous to its own worshippers. She had seen the fear in the gallery. She knew what frightened gods did. They burned things. They would burn the cathedral world itself before they let 9 billion minds watch them lose. So she opened her small channel, and she sent down it a single thought, in the only language she had, the language of light and certainty that her people used for prayer. But she did not send certainty. She sent the opposite. She sent doubt, her own, raw and honest, the doubt of a woman who had taught a lie for 40 years, and only now seen it. They are not gods. They were never gods. There is a machine. Please, show them the machine. The answer came back up the channel faster than she expected, and it was not words, and it was not light. It was an image, plain and gray and without grace, and Itesa recognized it because she had touched the mind that made it. It was the warship Last Verdict, seen from inside. Not its glory, because it had none. Its honesty. Rows of plain blunt guns. Crews who did not weep. A wall. And behind the wall, a patience that had crossed the entire dark of the galaxy to stand in front of the gods of Aurelia and be seen. And underneath the image, the same gentle, terrible thought she had felt twice before, but aimed now not at her, but through her, down the channel she had opened, toward 9 billion waiting minds. You wanted us to show them, it said. Step aside, Hierophant. We have done this before. The mirror reached its highest setting. The gods of Aurelia gathered 2,000 years of reflected glory into a single unstoppable flood and hurled it at the gray ship. And the gray ship, exactly as Acisa had known it would, opened the wall just a crack, just enough to let the flood in, and let the whole monstrous weight of the divine pour into a mind that had already decided what it believed, where it broke against the decision and went nowhere and did nothing, the way the sea breaks against a stone and only proves the stone. The mirror, finding no purchase, did what a mirror does when there is nothing to reflect. It reflected back. 2,000 years of accumulated divinity, the entire stored glory of the radiant choir, came roaring back up the channel toward its source, because the human mind had refused to hold it, and there was nowhere else for it to go. It surged back through the deep conduits, back into the focusing rings, back up toward the burning gallery where the gods sat waiting to be confirmed. And Aisa, standing at her small quiet channel, did the last thing. She held it open. She held open the little road between the returning flood and the prayer of the world, so that the glory rushing home to the gods passed first through 9 billion waiting minds, and as it passed, the humans did the thing they had crossed the galaxy to do. They let the faithful see the reflection for what it was. Not gods, a machine. Clever, frightened builders, who had told a lie so long they forgot it was a lie. 2,000 years of pageant, all of it, the burning glory, the kindness like a furnace, the certainty deeper than gravity, every bit of it stripped of the divine light that had hidden the gears, laid bare in the same plain gray honesty the humans used for everything, so that for 1/4 of 1 second, 9 billion souls saw their gods exactly as the small ship had seen them from the very first moment. Small, frightened, loud in a quiet room. And then the flood reached the burning gallery, and the gods of Aurelia received, all at once, the full reflected weight of their own 2,000-year lie, with nothing standing between them and it, and no faithful mind left to believe it for them. The prayer did not stop this time. This time, it turned around. Aisa had spent 40 years teaching that the gods could not be opposed. She had never once imagined that they could be answered, and that the answer would come not from a fleet or a weapon, but from 9 billion of the faithful, turning their faces upward at the same instant, and for the first time, not believing what they saw. The radiant choir burned in their high gallery. They had always burned. The burning was the glory, the visible proof of the divine, the light that no mortal could look at without kneeling. But the light had never been their own. It had been the mirror's, reflected and amplified and poured into every watching mind. And now the mirror had turned that light around and sent it home, and the gods received their own glory unbelieved. A god who is believed in is a god. A god who is not is only a creature standing in a very bright room. The light did not destroy them. Aisa watched, and she would tell the truth of it for the rest of her life, even when the faithful wanted a grander story. The gods did not burst into flame. They did not scream. The burning glory that wrapped them simply stopped being holy, because holiness had only ever been the agreement of the minds that received it, and the agreement had broken. The radiant choir sat in their gallery in light that was now just light, and across the whole cathedral world, 9 billion souls looked up and saw, for the first time, what had always been there. Frightened people, old and clever, and so very tired. Descendants of builders who had told one lie so well and so long that they had been imprisoned inside it, made to perform divinity every hour of every day for 2,000 years, never once allowed to be small, never once allowed to be afraid out loud, until the performance had hollowed them into the gods their machine insisted they were. It was, Acisa understood, the cruelest thing the mirror had done, not to the conquered worlds, to the choir themselves. It had made them gods, and a god is the loneliest thing in the universe, because a god can never be seen. There was one of the choir who did not come down from the gallery with the others, and Aisa went to find her, because she had felt this one's mind during the fall, and it had not broken like the rest. Her name, when she finally remembered she had ever had one, was Erin. She had been the youngest of the gods, raised to the gallery only 200 years before, and so the mirror had not had as long to eat her, and a thread of the frightened person she had been still survived beneath the divinity. When the reflected glory came roaring home, and 9 billion minds saw the gods unbelieved. Erin had felt the lie peel off her like a burning skin, and underneath it she had found, to her own astonishment, relief. Aissa found her sitting on the floor of the high gallery, in light that was now just light, looking at her own hands, as though she had never seen them. She was weeping, but not the way the grieving faithful wept on the temple floor. She was weeping the way a prisoner weeps when the door is finally opened, frightened of the size of the world outside, and unable to stop walking toward it. "I never wanted it," Erin said, when Aissa came near. She did not look up. "Do you understand that? Not one of us wanted it. We were chosen. We were put in front of the mirror, and it told us what we were, and we could not argue. Because the moment you receive your own reflection, 10 billion times, you stop being able to remember that it is a reflection. I have been a god for 200 years, and I never once wanted it, and I never once could say so. Because a god who says he is afraid is a god who breaks the peace, and the peace was everything. The peace was the only reason any of it was allowed." She finally looked up, and her eyes were the eyes of a young frightened person, not a god at all. "Your ship, the gray one, it did not break us. It let us go. Do the worlds understand that? It did not kill the gods. It opened the door we could never open ourselves." Aissa sat down beside her on the floor of the gallery where she had stood as a young hierophant, and she did not know what to say, so she said the only true thing she had. "No," she said, "the worlds do not understand it yet. They think they were freed, and we were punished. They cannot see that we were prisoners too, the longest held of all. It will take 100 years for them to understand, maybe more." "Will you teach them?" Erin asked. "I am going to try," Aissa said. "I do not know if I can. I have no gods behind me now, and no machine, and no certainty. I have only what the humans left me, which is the right to decide what I believe and act on it without being sure. It is a thin thing to build a world on." Erin almost smiled, through the weeping. "It is more than we ever had," she said. "We had certainty, and it made us gods, and being gods was the loneliest thing in creation. You have doubt, and it will make you free, and free is frightening, but it is not lonely. The doubting are never alone. Only the certain are alone, up in the gallery, performing a glory no one is allowed to see behind." Aissa would remember that, all her life. Only the certain are alone. It was the truest thing a god of Aurelia ever said, and it was said by one on the floor, in light that was only light, 200 years a prisoner, and 1 hour free. Far out in the dark, the warship Last Verdict was already pulling away, and Aissa felt the human minds aboard it recede, calm and patient, and unbeautiful, going home. They had not stayed to hear Erin weep. They had not stayed to be thanked, or worshipped, or even understood. They had passed their verdict, and they were going home, and the going was the verdict's final clause, the part that made it real. A judge who stays to watch the prisoner walk free has not freed the prisoner, he has only changed the prison. The humans understood this in their bones, the way a species understands a thing only after it has gotten the same thing terribly wrong somewhere in its own past, and learned. Aissa wondered, sitting on the gallery floor beside a weeping former god, what the humans had done wrong, once, long ago, to learn it so well. She would never know. They had not told her, and they did not come back, and the not knowing was itself a kind of gift, because it meant she could not build a religion out of their history, could not turn the humans into a new set of gods with a new sacred story. They had left her a verdict and a rumor, and an empty gallery, and nothing she could kneel to, and that was exactly, precisely, what a freed people needed, and exactly what no god had ever once thought to give. The warship Last Verdict had given them, in the end, the one thing 2,000 years of glory had stolen. It had made them visible, small, and frightened, and human, in the way that every species discovers it is human the moment the lie it lives inside is finally stripped away. The choir did not fight it. Aissa had feared they would, had feared the frightened gods would burn the world rather than be seen, but the humans had not given them the chance, and more than that, the humans had not given them a reason. The Last Verdict had not threatened the cathedral world. It had not aimed a single gun at the 9 billion. It had aimed only at the lie, and when the lie broke, the people beneath it were simply people, and people, freed of a thing that has ridden them for 2,000 years, do not generally reach for fire. They reach for each other. Across the great curved floor of the temple world, the morning prayer did not resume. Something else rose in its place, something Aurelia had not heard in 2,000 years, a vast and ragged and entirely human sound. The sound of 9 billion minds discovering at the same instant that they had been afraid their whole lives of a thing that could not hurt them, and that the fear was over. Some of it was grief. A great deal of it was grief. You do not lose your gods, even false ones, without grief. There were those who wept for the certainty they would never feel again, the warm furnace kindness of the divine light, the comfort of being small beneath something vast. The mirror had given them that comfort for 2,000 years, and now it was gone, and the galaxy beyond Aurelia was suddenly very large and very dark, and entirely unwatched by any loving eye. That is a hard thing to learn in a single morning. Aissa did not pretend otherwise. She had learned it herself only hours before, and it had nearly broken her. But underneath the grief, there was something the choir had never let the faithful have, and it was worth, Aissa believed, every tear on the temple floor. It was the simple, terrible, magnificent freedom of a mind that finally gets to decide for itself what it believes. The watchkeepers fled the chamber of the mirror. The eldest one, the one who had told Aissa that doubt was the wound, looked at her on his way out with an expression she would remember forever. Because it was not anger, it was the look of a man who has just realized that the thing he called a wound was the only honest part of him, and that he had spent his life trying to heal it shut. Aissa did not flee. She stayed by her small, quiet channel, the one she had opened between the human ship and the world, and she held it open until the last of the reflected glory had drained out of the conduits, and the mirror went dark and cold and silent beneath the floor of the world. Then she stood alone in the great chamber that had built the gods, in the sudden enormous quiet, and she felt the human thought come to her one final time, gentle as ever, up the channel she had opened with her own hands. It was over the war, Aissa would later understand, not begun, over. The humans had come to do one thing, and they had done it, and they did not stay to rule the ruin they had made of the lie. That was the part the conquered galaxy would never quite believe, the part that made the worlds tremble more than any fleet. The radiant choir would have stayed. The choir's whole nature was to be received, to plant the flag, to bend the knee. The humans planted nothing. They bent no one. They had crossed the entire dark of the galaxy to stand in front of the loudest gods in creation and make those gods be seen, and having made them be seen, they were finished. Thank you, the thought said, and Aissa was so startled she nearly fell. Gods did not thank. The conquered did not thank, but the humans thanked her, the priestess who had opened the small channel, the one mind on Aurelia who had decided what she believed, in time to help. We could have broken the mirror from outside. It would have taken longer, and cost your world more. You opened the door from within. That mattered. Then, after a pause, a thing she had not expected, a thing that would shape the rest of her life. They are your people now, Hierophant, not the gods. Yours. Someone will have to teach 9 billion frightened minds how to live without being told what is true. We cannot do that. We only break the lie. The living after is not a thing a warship knows how to do. And the warship last verdict, having said this, turned its blunt, ugly gray face away from the cathedral world, and began, slowly, to leave. Aissa ran. She did not decide to. Her body decided. She ran up out of the chamber of the mirror, up through the dark conduits, up past the watch priests sitting stunned on the temple floor, up to the high gallery where she had stood that morning and watched a splinter refuse to pray. She came to the gallery's edge, breathless, 40 years of certainty and ruins behind her, and she looked out at the small gray ship pulling away into the dark. She reached out with all the practiced power of her office, the power she had used to pour glory into 11 worlds, and she touched the human mind one last time, and this time, the wall opened for her, without being forced, because she was no longer trying to bend it. She was only trying to understand. And she understood. She understood that the humans had not been certain at all. That was the secret behind the wall, the patience that had frightened her. They had not crossed the galaxy believing they could not lose. They had crossed it knowing they very well might, and coming anyway, because they had seen 11 dead worlds kneeling to a lie and decided that a galaxy ruled by being seen was a galaxy that needed, somewhere in it, one thing that could not be made to kneel. They had built the last verdict not to be a god. The whole point was that it was not a god. It was a plain gray, honest thing, ugly and unbeautiful, and entirely mortal, that took the full glory of the divine into itself, and was unmoved, not because it was greater than the gods, but because it had decided what it believed, and a mind that has decided is the one thing in the universe no god can touch. That was the verdict the ship had been named for, not a sentence passed on Aurelia, a verdict passed on the whole idea of gods who rule by being seen, guilty of being only loud. She had touched the human mind 3 times, and each time she had reached for a soul and found a wall, and only at the very end did she understand what the wall had been. It had not been arrogance. It had not been the cold emptiness of a machine. The wall was something the humans had built on purpose, out of long and bitter practice, and Ayunsa came to think of it as the most human thing about them. It was the wall a mind builds when it has decided, once and for all, that no outside thing gets to tell it what is true, not a god, not a mirror, not a glory poured in through the eyes at dawn. The humans had built that wall in every single one of their minds, not because they were stronger than other species, but because somewhere in their own past, they had learned what happened to a people who did not build it, and they had chosen, every one of them, to never be that people again. That was why the glory had failed against them. Akasa had spent 40 years pouring divine certainty into worlds that had no wall, minds that opened at dawn and received whatever was given, and every one of those worlds had knelt, because a mind with no wall is a house with no door, and anything can walk in and call itself a god. The humans had a door. The humans had decided what they believed before they ever crossed the dark, and a mind that has decided does not open at dawn for anyone, not for a god, not for a mirror, not for the most beautiful certainty in creation. The glory had reached the human wall and found it shut, and a glory that finds a shut door has no power at all, because its only power was ever the open door of a mind that did not want to decide for itself. The humans wanted to decide for themselves. That was the whole of it. That was the entire weapon, behind all the gray hull and the blunt guns and the flat note with no music in it. They had built a ship that could not be told what to believe, crewed it with minds that could not be told what to believe, and pointed the whole thing at the loudest telling in the galaxy, and the telling had broken against them like the sea against a stone, and proved the stone. Aisa understood, at the end, that this was the verdict the ship had been named for, the verdict that had nothing to do with the guns. The guns had only cleared the halo. The guns had only bought the time. The real verdict was the wall, the decided mind, the human refusal to receive. It said, to the gods of Aurelia, and to every watching world, a single sentence that 2,000 years of glory could not answer. You do not get to tell me what is true. That was the sentence. That was the whole of the human gift to the galaxy, the thing the gray ship had carried across the entire dark, and set down in front of the most certain power in creation. Not a new faith, not a kinder God, not even freedom exactly, because freedom was only the result. The gift was the wall, the right to build a door in your own mind and decide for yourself who you let in, the right to look at the burning thing in the high gallery and say, calmly, without fear, I will decide whether you are a god, and not the other way around. The gods of Aurelia had ruled by being seen, because they had ruled minds with no walls, no doors, no right of refusal. They had never once met a mind that could look at them and reserve judgment. They had never imagined such a mind could exist, because in 2,000 years of conquest, they had never met one. And a god who has never been refused forgets that refusal is even possible, the way a man who has never been struck forgets that he can bleed. Then one gray ship had crossed the dark, full of minds with walls, and refused them, and the galaxy had watched the gods discover, in a single morning, that they could be refused, and that being refused, they were nothing at all, only loud, only frightened, only people standing in a very bright room. The illusion had not been the glory was real enough, as light. The illusion had been the idea that the glory had to be received, that a mind shown a god had no choice but to kneel. The humans had shattered that idea simply by not kneeling, and once it was shattered, it could never be rebuilt, because every world in the galaxy now knew, in the cold free dark of its own mind, that a god could be refused. A god who can be refused is not a god. That was the verdict, and the humans had passed it, and gone home, and left the galaxy to live inside it. Ayesa would spend the rest of her life teaching the worlds how. It was the hardest thing she ever did, and the only thing worth doing, and she had decided that herself, behind her own wall, in her own decided mind, where no god, and no mirror, and no glory, would ever reach again. Ayesa stood at the gallery's edge and watched the warship Last Verdict shrink to a splinter, and then to a point, and then to nothing, swallowed by the dark it had come out of. It left no flag, it left no garrison, it left no demand. It left only 9 billion freed and frightened minds, and one Hierophant who had touched the truth 3 times and lived, and the cold dead mirror beneath the floor of a world that would now have to learn, for the first time in 2,000 years, how to look at things, and decide for itself what they were. The gods of Aurelia did not die that day. That was the thing Ayesa would spend the rest of her life explaining to worlds that wanted a cleaner story. They were not killed, they were only seen. And being seen, they were no longer gods, only people, old and clever, and tired, who came down at last from the burning gallery, on legs that had forgotten how to walk among others, and stood on the temple floor for the first time in 2,000 years, small among the small. Some of the faithful wanted to burn them. Ayesa understood the want. 2,000 years is a long time to be afraid of something that could not hurt you, but she had touched the human mind, and she had learned its strange grammar, the grammar of a species that broke lies and did not stay to rule the ruins, and she found that she did not want to burn anything. She wanted instead the harder thing. She wanted to teach. So she did not let them burn the choir. She stood between the freed and the fallen, a Hierophant with no gods left to serve, and she said the first honest sermon of her life, and it was very short. They were never gods, she said. They were us, with a machine. And now the machine is dark, and we are all only what we always were. That is not a curse. That is the beginning of being free. We will learn to look at things and decide for ourselves what they are. It will be hard. It will be the hardest thing our world has ever done, but a small gray ship crossed the entire dark of the galaxy to give us the chance, and asked nothing in return, and I will not waste it on a fire. 9 billion minds heard her, through the channels she had spent 40 years learning, and for the first time in the history of Aurelia, they did not believe her, because a god commanded it. They considered what she had said, and then, each of them, in the quiet of their own newly free minds, they decided whether it was true. That, Ayesa thought, was the true gift the humans had left, not the fall of the gods, the right to decide, and she stood on the temple floor, among the small, and the frightened, and the freed, and she began, with no idea how to do it, the work of a lifetime. The news of the stuttering prayer had traveled the galaxy at the speed of fear. The news of its stopping traveled faster. On 11 conquered worlds, the morning the gods fell, the faithful felt the divine light go out of their minds, like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. For 2,000 years, the radiant choir had reached across the dark and touched every kneeling world at once, pouring certainty into them with each dawn, and for 2,000 years, no one on any of those worlds had ever woken without it. Then one morning they did. The light did not come, the certainty did not come. There was only the quiet of their own minds, vast and dark and entirely their own, and the slow dawning realization that the thing they had knelt to for 100 generations had been a reflection in a machine, and the machine was dark. Some worlds wept, some worlds raged. A few, in the first terrible hours, tried to find new gods to kneel to, because a mind that has knelt for 2,000 years does not learn to stand in a single morning. But on every one of the 11 worlds, sooner or later, the same word came whispering up out of the dark, carried by trade ships and refugee fleets and the slow, patient grapevine of a freed galaxy. A ship, one small gray ship, ugly and unbeautiful, that took the full glory of the gods into itself and was not moved, and stood in front of the radiant choir and made them be seen, and asked nothing, and left. They did not know its world. The humans had not announced themselves. They had not planted a flag on Aurelia, or sent envoys to the freed worlds, or done any of the things a conquering power does. They had done one thing, and gone home, and the galaxy was left to make of it what it would. What the galaxy made of it was a kind of awe that no fleet had ever earned. The choir had ruled by being seen, by being vast and burning and undeniable, and the whole of their power had rested on the certainty that they could not be opposed. The humans had not opposed them. That was the thing that shook the worlds. The humans had not fought the gods on the gods' terms at all. They had simply refused to be afraid, and the refusal had been enough, and now every world in the galaxy that had ever knelt to anything was lying awake in the dark of its own free mind, wondering what else it had been afraid of that could not actually hurt it. That was the verdict, spreading, not a conquest, a question, the most dangerous thing one species can hand another. Aissa stayed on Aurelia. There was nowhere else she could have gone, and nothing else she could have done. And besides, the work was there, and the work was hers. The humans had said it themselves, up the channel, in the last moment before they left. They are your people now, not the gods, yours. She had not understood it then. She understood it more every day. The fallen choir lived. That was the hardest part for the freed worlds to forgive, when they sent their envoys to Aurelia in the years that followed, hungry to see the corpses of their tormentors. There were no corpses. Aissa had not let them be burned. The old gods lived in a plain district of the temple world, among the small and the ordinary, learning the thing they had been denied for 2,000 years, which was how to be seen and survive it. They were not punished, and they were not worshipped. And for a creature who has been a god, Aissa came to understand that middle place, the simple ordinary place of being neither, was a harder country than any fire. She visited them. She did not entirely know why, perhaps because she alone had touched the human mind and learned its grammar, the strange grammar of breaking a lie and not staying to rule the ruin, and she found she could not break the choir's lie and then leave them in the ruin of it either. So she taught them, the old gods, the same thing she taught the 9 billion, how to look at a thing and decide for yourself what it is. The eldest of them, the one who had told her doubt was the wound, was the slowest to learn, because he had been a god the longest. But he learned. On the last day of his life, very old, very tired, no longer burning at all, he told Aissa that the small gray ship had given him the only honest day he had ever known, the day he was finally allowed to be afraid out loud, and that he was grateful, and that he hoped the humans never learned to be gods themselves, because the galaxy could not survive a second lie that good. Aissa hoped so too. She thought about it often, in the years of the long work. She had touched the human mind 3 times, and she had learned its secret, and the secret frightened her in a way the gods never had. The humans had not been certain. They had crossed the galaxy not knowing if they would win, and come anyway, and that was a kind of strength the choir had never possessed and could not have imagined, because the choir's whole power had rested on never doubting. The humans doubted constantly. They doubted and acted anyway. They built ugly gray honest things and pointed them at the loudest lies in creation and refused to be afraid. And they did this not because they were certain they were right, but because they had decided what they believed and were willing to be wrong and act regardless. That, Aissa came to think, was the real verdict the ship had carried. Not that gods were false. That certainty itself was the trap. The choir had been imprisoned by certainty, by 2,000 years of a mirror that told them exactly who they were and never let them doubt it. The humans had walked into the heart of the most certain power in the galaxy, carrying nothing but their own willingness to be uncertain. And the uncertainty had been the one thing the mirror could not reflect, the one lock the divine key did not fit. You cannot make a creature kneel to your certainty when it has made peace with not being sure of anything at all. She wrote this down, in the years of the work. She wrote a great deal down. The first honest histories of Aurelia, the ones that did not begin with the glory of the gods but with the small frightened builders, and the machine they made, and the lie that ate them. She taught the children to read them. She taught the children to doubt them too, because a history believed without question was just a smaller mirror, and she had spent 40 years inside one mirror and would not build another. The children learned to argue with her. It was the proudest thing she ever accomplished, the day a child of Aurelia, 9 years old, looked up from one of her histories and said, plainly, without fear, "I don't think that part is true," and meant Asa's own writing, and was not struck down, and was instead thanked. The gods would never have allowed it. The humans had made it possible. And Aisa, who had poured glory into 11 worlds and felt the human mind file it away as a forgery, spent the rest of her life trying to deserve the gift. The freed worlds did not all forgive Aurelia, and they did not all thank the humans. And Aisa learned, in the long years of the work, that a galaxy waking from 2,000 years of certainty wakes the way a limb wakes that has been slept on, with pain before feeling. The first envoys came from a world called Thren, which had knelt to the choir for 90 generations. They arrived angry, because anger was the easiest of the new feelings, and they demanded that Asia hand over the fallen gods to be judged. Asaza met them on the temple floor, alone, with no glory and no certainty and no machine behind her, only her decided mind, and she told them the truth of the record. She told them the gods had been frightened people who told a lie to save their world, and been eaten by it. She told them that Thren too had its certainties, its faiths that burned, its hungers to be told what was true, and that if Thren was not careful, it would build its own mirror within 10 generations, and become the very thing it had come to judge. The envoys did not believe her at first. Then, slowly, in the quiet of their own newly free minds, they considered what she had said, and decided, each for themselves, whether it was true. Some of them decided it was. Those ones stayed, and learned, and went home changed, and carried the harder lesson back to Thren, that the enemy had never been the gods but the hunger for certainty that built them. Others decided it was not, and went home unchanged, and Asa let them, because the whole of the gift was the right to decide, and a freedom that forced its own conclusions was just a smaller mirror. This was the work, year after year. It was slow and it was unglamorous, and it would not have made a story the freed worlds wanted to hear. They wanted gods overthrown, and tyrants punished, and a clean, bright dawn of liberty. What they got was a tired hierophant on a temple floor, patiently teaching 9 billion frightened minds, and then 10 worlds, and then 100, the single hardest skill in the universe, which was how to look at a burning certain thing and decide for yourself whether to kneel. The humans never came back to help. Asa stopped expecting them. She understood, more every year, why they stayed away. If they had returned, if they had built an embassy, or sent teachers, or offered the freed worlds their friendship and their protection, the galaxy would have made gods of them within a century, because the hunger for certainty does not care what shape it kneels to, and a kind protector is as good a god as a cruel one to a mind that does not want to decide for itself. The humans knew this. They had seen it on 11 worlds, so they had done the one honest thing and the hardest thing, which was to break the lie and then vanish, and leave no new certainty in its place, not even themselves. It was the most generous thing Akisa had ever encountered, and the loneliest. The humans had given the galaxy a gift that the galaxy could only receive by never seeing the givers again. To stay would have been to ruin it. So they had gone home to their small blue world and let themselves become a rumor, a gray ship that crossed the dark and asked for nothing, and the rumor did more than any embassy could have. It frightened the worlds in exactly the right way. It made them wonder what else they were afraid of that could not hurt them. There were setbacks. There were worlds that fell back into certainty, that found new gods, that built small mirrors of their own, out of priests or machines, or charismatic liars, and Asa grieved each one, but she did not despair, because she had learned the human discipline of acting without certainty. She did not know that the work would succeed. She suspected it might fail, that certainty might win in the end, that the hunger to be told what is true might be too deep in every thinking thing to ever fully break. She did the work anyway. That was the whole of what the humans had taught her. You decide what you believe, and you act, and you do not require the universe to promise you that you are right, because the requiring is the first brick of the next mirror. She thought of the human ship often, in the years of the work. She thought of how small it had been, how ugly, how entirely without grace, and she understood at last that the smallness had been the point. A beautiful ship, a glorious ship, a ship that burned and shone, would have become a new god the moment it toppled the old ones. the galaxy would have knelt to it. So the humans had built the ugliest, plainest, grayest thing they could, a thing impossible to worship, a thing that offered the eye nothing to kneel to, and they had made the toppling of the gods so unglamorous, so blunt, so honest, that no one could turn it into a new religion. They had even named it plainly. Not the glory of Earth, not the hand of humanity. The last verdict. A flat, final, unbeautiful word. The word a tired judge says at the end of a long trial, and then goes home. Asesa came to love that name more than any name she had ever known. It contained the whole of the human gift. A verdict is not a conquest. A verdict is a thing decided, and then it is over, and the judge does not stay to rule the courtroom. The humans had passed their verdict on the gods of Aurelia, on the whole idea of certainty made divine, and then they had gone home, because a judge who stays becomes a king, and a king becomes a god becomes a mirror, and the mirror eats the world. They had broken the cycle by refusing to be the next link in it. That was the verdict. Not guilty, not innocent. Only seen, only decided, only ended. And then the dark, and the long quiet, and a galaxy left to do the rest itself. In the last year of her life, a ship came to Aurelia from a world Asesa had never heard of, far out toward the human arm of the galaxy, and the envoy who stepped off it was not angry, and did not demand anything, and did not kneel. The envoy had come, she said, because her world had heard the rumor of the gray ship and the toppled gods, and had spent 100 years arguing about what it meant, and had finally decided, each mind for itself, that it meant they should come and learn from the world that had been freed, not to be told what was true, but to see how a people lived who had decided to look at things themselves. Asesa wept when she understood. The work was spreading, not as a faith, as a habit. World by world, slowly, the galaxy was learning the human discipline, not because anyone commanded it, but because once a single world had shown that it could be done, that a mind could decide for itself and survive, the doing could not be unlearned. The gods had ruled by being seen. The humans had freed the galaxy by being barely seen at all, by leaving only a rumor and a verdict, and the empty space where a new god should have stood. And the empty space, Asesa understood at last, was the gift, not a new certainty, the absence of one, the cold, clean dark of a mind that finally got to decide for itself, with no burning thing in the high gallery to do the deciding for it. It was not comfortable, it was not warm, it was not the furnace kindness of the old divine light. It was better than all of those, and harder, and entirely free. She died believing it had been worth it, and she had decided that herself, with no machine and no god to tell her so, and that was the whole of the gift, and it was enough. She never saw the warship last verdict again. No one on Aurelia did. It had come out of the dark and done its one terrible honest thing, and gone back into the dark, and the humans did not return, did not send envoys, did not ask for tribute or thanks or worship. For a long time the freed worlds waited for them, half in hope and half in dread, certain that any power that could topple the radiant choir must mean to take the choir's place. The power never came. The humans, it seemed, did not want worlds. They had wanted only to make one lie be seen, and having made it be seen, they were finished, and the not coming back was, in the end, the loudest proof of all, that they had never been gods, and never wished to be. Asesa thought she understood it, near the end of her life. The humans had not freed the galaxy. They had only broken one lie, in one place, and trusted the freed to do the rest themselves, because the alternative, the staying, the ruling, the becoming gods, would have made them exactly the thing they had crossed the dark to break. They had left the work undone on purpose. They had left it to the small, and the frightened, and the freed, because the work of learning to decide for yourself what is true is not a thing a warship can do for you, and a freedom that is handed to you by a new god is just a new kind of kneeling. So they had handed it to no one. They had simply made it possible, and left. It was not a clean victory. Asesa would never call it that, in all her years of teaching. 9 billion minds had lost their gods in a single morning, and some of them never recovered, and went to their graves grieving a certainty that had been a lie. 11 worlds woke into a darkness they had not asked for, and did not all survive intact. The galaxy did not become wise overnight, or kind, or free. It became uncertain. which is only the beginning of those things, and not the things themselves. And the beginning is hard, and many did not love it. There were worlds that cursed the small gray ship for taking their gods, even false ones, even cruel ones, because a cruel certainty is still a certainty, and the dark of your own free mind is a cold place to be left alone. Asesa did not pretend otherwise. That was the discipline the humans had taught her, the discipline of looking at a thing and deciding for yourself what it is, even when the thing is your own great victory, and the deciding makes it smaller. The last verdict had not made the galaxy good. It had made the galaxy free to be good, or not, by its own choice. And that was both less than the freed worlds had hoped, and more than any god had ever offered. And it was, Aisa came to believe, the only kind of gift worth giving. She died very old, on the temple floor of a world that no longer prayed, surrounded by children who argued with her histories and a few of the fallen choir who had outlived their godhood and learned, at last, to be small. She was not afraid. She had decided, long ago, what she believed. And a mind that has decided is the one thing in the universe that no god, and no fear, and no machine can touch. That was the whole of what the humans had brought to Aurelia, the entire cargo of one ugly gray ship that crossed the dark and asked for nothing. Not salvation, not rule, only the right to look at the burning thing in the high gallery and decide, for yourself, whether to kneel. In her last hours, she asked to be carried up to the high gallery one final time, the gallery where she had stood as a young Hierophant and watched a splinter refuse to pray. They carried her up. The gallery was empty now. The gods were gone. The burning was gone. The mirror lay dark and cold beneath the floor of the world. A museum to a lie, walked through by children who came to see the machine that had made gods, and to learn, by seeing it, never to build another. Oasa looked out at the dark where the warship Last Verdict had vanished, all those years ago, and she reached out one last time with the practiced power of her office, the power she had once used to pour glory into 11 kneeling worlds, and she touched nothing, because the humans were long gone, and would not come again, but she found, in the reaching, that she did not need them to. She had learned the lesson. She carried it in her own decided mind, where no god could reach it. The galaxy was uncertain now, and frightened, and free, and somewhere far across the dark, a small gray honest thing had gone home to a small blue world and asked for nothing, and the asking for nothing was the whole of the verdict, and the verdict would outlast every god who had ever ruled by being seen. She closed her eyes. The temple world was quiet around her, 9 billion minds each deciding for themselves what to believe, arguing, doubting, choosing, free. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, and it was not light, and it was not certainty, and it was not the prayer she had been born into. It was just people, small and frightened, and looking at things, and deciding. The gods of Aurelia had called themselves gods for 2,000 years, and the galaxy had believed them, because believing was easier than looking. Then one human warship, ugly and gray and unafraid, had crossed the entire dark to stand in front of them, and refused to look away. And in the refusing, it had made the gods be seen, and a thing that can be seen is a thing that can be doubted, and a thing that can be doubted was never a god at all. That was the illusion. One small ship had shattered it, and asked for nothing, and gone home. And the galaxy, freed and frightened and uncertain at last, began the long, hard work of learning to live without gods, and to look at the burning things, and to decide, each mind for itself, what was true. Hierophant Aasa Mole died, believing it had been worth it. She had decided, and no one could take that from her, and that was the whole of the gift, and it was enough.